More dirty oil washed ashore today. The greatest oil spill in American history now covers 29,000 square miles, the size of South Carolina. And there's more to this disaster you can't see. Scientists have discovered another massive underwater oil plume, 22 miles from the broken wellhead, moving northeast toward Mobile Bay.
36 hours after the first explosion, time runs out.
But about 10 o'clock in the morning, for about 15 minutes, you really heard a lot of really loud noise.
Combating the fire, we could hear the rig creaking and groaning and settling. And during that period of time, there was multiple explosions.
50 miles off the coast of Louisiana is an ordinary day for engineers and workers going about their day. It was a 3-week job with duties ranging from data to physical labor. Heavy machinery was also used and equipment were known to malfunction from time to time. It was tough and sometimes overbearing, but normal for the company. It was business as usual until the warning signs had come. A bad cement job and critical failure of the shoe track and blind shear ram blades, unable to cut the drill pipe, ends in disaster. On April 20th, 2010, an oil rig known as the Deepwater Horizon was worked on as usual, containing the crew of 126 people. Jimmy Harrell was the team supervisor who had reported to his majors and took care of his team. He was well liked by his crew and respected by most of his co-workers. He had warned his BP higher-ups that the cement job that had taken place was improperly done and needed more work. Despite his warnings, BP had insisted that it would take too much time for repair, but little did most of the crew know, however, that this would mark the day of the worst environmental ocean spill ever in history, also taking the lives of 11 crewmates and injuring 17 more, with a total of 28 casualties and only counting the ones that were recorded. The events that led to the disaster had the ability to have been prevented weeks prior, but due to the neglect of the pipeline's blowout and preventer, the faulty machinery plus the cement job, an investigation later was made against BP for their inaction. Over 5 million barrels of oil spilled into the ocean over several months, severely damaging the environment of the Gulf of Mexico and the world. In this video, I will explain what happened with the pipeline, the purpose of an oil rig, and what went wrong in this particular event. To understand what happened in the technical sense, we must analyze the engineering of the Macondo well. We should keep note that the Macondo well and the Deepwater Horizon were two separate entities. One was the oil rig itself, and the other was the installment to drill up oil. The main function of an oil rig is to extract petroleum and natural gas from the earth itself by drilling a 3-foot wide hole into the ground, often drilled several miles beneath the seabed of the ocean. These tunnels are also called and known as a wellbore. In the instance of the Deepwater Horizon, over the course of several months, the well was continuously drilled deeper and was started back in 2009 by another oil rig, but subsequently replaced by the Deepwater Horizon. By its end, it had drilled to an estimated 18,000 feet beneath the Earth's crust. Everything seemed to be going normal by this point, but the challenges that is faced, however, when drilling these holes is the pressure of water, mud, and crude oil that naturally exists within the earth. The well pipeline was designed with many mechanical components that will go off in the function of a blowout. This is when crude oil and natural gases are uncontrollably released from immense pressure due to being compressed underneath basalt and subsea rock sediment. But unfortunately, in this instance, all of these procedures had failed. The events that happened prior to the explosion isn't entirely agreed upon, as there are different sources that claim different outcomes of the event, and conversations of crewmates that were on board were not documented in the same way as the event itself. But there were certain things to note that were important to how the night occurred. The first immediate sign of an issue was when a company called Halliburton was contracted for personnel to work on maintenance and tests on the drill line, including cement job for the pipeline that we mentioned earlier. However, their work was cut short There was a deadline to get it finished faster than the time that was needed to finish a proper foam cement. On average, sometimes it takes several weeks for this procedure to happen, and so it would have delayed the regular work of the pipeline itself. It ended up being weaker than what it should have been due to cutting corners and being rushed by order. While BP and Halliburton had made plans to finish a more stable cement job, the oil rig kept being in regular use when it should have been in repair. By this point, the Macondo well kept drilling, but there was noticeable pressure force when the drill was plunged deeper. The team agreed to conduct a test to see if the drill was functioning properly. 2 tests ended up being performed on the Macondo well, the first being the negative pressure test. The first annular preventer had been closed. By the way, this was a device also known as the annular blowout preventer, and you guessed it, it was to prevent a blowout. To put it simply, it closes the space inside of the drill around the drill pipe in a ring-shaped torus that inflates like a rubber tire until the area is completely sealed. This was in hope to remove pressure that had been built inside of the pipeline, but the problem was that the liquid was already above the annular preventer. The hydraulic closing pressure was raised close to 2000 psi, which resisted the flow of oil in the drill pipe. PSI in itself stands for pound of force per square inch. It is a unit of measurement of pressure per 1 pound of force applied to a unit of area. So in this instance, a square as the measurement moving forward. An average human exerts up to 150 psi of force, say if you got punched in the face by someone else. While that would hurt, it's nothing in comparison to what these mechanical and hydraulic devices are capable of. The higher the PSI, the more violent it becomes. For example, if you inflate a tire and the more air inside of the tire, the more force is needed in order for it to escape. Therefore, there is more pressure, but a burst occurs when there is too much pressure. Roughly 200 psi is enough to burst a tire. The same thing will happen with the surface of the drill pipe, even though the drill pipe valve was made to withstand 10,000 psi. The drill pipe valve had been opened to reduce pressure by the worker in that station, but by this point the liquid had seeped past the annular preventer and was not reducing any psi. The well site leader had decided at this point that tests should be made on the kill line, which was the secondary pipe for high pressure that pumped the well's drill fluid in order to prevent a blowout. Around 20 barrels of water and mud had been bled out, but unfortunately this was not enough to prevent the pressure, as it still rose in the pipeline, but had dropped to 0 in the kill line even though the flow was clogged by sediment, or at least this was presumed to be the case. Both gauges should have been at the same level, but they weren't. The movie gave a lot of CGI visuals to this scenario, so it doesn't explain step by step the occurrences, chronologically the same events until the explosion scene was documented on what happened, from looking at different sources that I found. But the same tests had happened during the real events before the disaster. Anyways, due to there being a large pressure on the drill pipe and no pressure on the kill pipe, it was documented that well site leader was confused on the source of the problem, and there was major disagreement on what had caused the dangerous level of pressure to occur. The well was then reopened by the top annular valve. The liquid was entered into the trip tank, which in the film was one of the rare instances that is actually directly explained on screen. End quote. Mud displacement removes pressure, stabilizing mud from well prior to disconnection. The function of this was that pressure would fall, however, the pressure kept rising and overfilled the trip tank. Eventually, the pumps had to be stopped because it was leaking out into the deck. This was because crude oil had already filled in past the top annular preventer, even more so than previously. The spacer, which, not to be confused with a physical object, was the liquid that separated the drilling fluid that had reached the top of the well in pressure. Now the team worried, the crewmen inspected the pump, gauges, and well cap, but by this point it was too late. The pressure exceeds 5,000 psi in the pipeline, and it bursts through the deck floor, spilling tens of gallons of crude oil onto the derrick and the crewmate. Eventually, the situation is classed as a kick. This is when fluid flows into the well bore with an unwanted influx. A lot of key words here, but the influx being water, oil, and sediments all mixed together, these were especially dangerous because natural gases like methane are emitted from the earth, plus the oil are extremely flammable if coming into contact with a combustible source of energy. Again, the crew closes the annular preventer, plus rerouting the influx fluid into the mud gas separator in this instance of a kick. But this would be the first failure of procedure in a line of greater catastrophes. The gas alarms began going off, which was a sign of methane in the atmosphere. It is important to note by this point that methane is a substance that naturally occurs in decomposed matter. However, in the industry responsible for the use of crude oil and making it refined, methane is almost 30 times more effective at trapping heat into the atmosphere than carbon dioxide when released, making it a much faster greenhouse. Keep that in mind. In Earth's history millions of years ago, ancient animals, plants, and organic matter existed far before humans did, and also much larger. At one point when there was land, living matter died naturally and decomposed into the ground, while the bacteria responsible for the decomposition and the lack of oxygen created methane. At this point, a long time ago, the Gulf of Mexico was actual land. But over time, geological activity and sediment would bury these once living matter, turning them into fossil fuels. But when humans discovered that oil was an excellent source of energy, we found ways to remove it from the ground and power the entire world, making it very valuable because of it being a relatively limited resource, plus it being hard to obtain. However, it did come with its consequences. By this point, the fluid had overpowered all reroutes and the annular preventer again, but for the final time, rapidly increasing the pressure to over 10,000 psi and blowing out the well completely. The oil had reached several hundreds of feet into the air, and the gas had spread throughout the decks of the oil rig, eventually causing the ignition and leading to several explosions that occurred. The evacuation from the Deepwater horizon had begun only a few minutes after the explosions had occurred. An emergency protocol was made to get workers off the decks after the order to abandon ship was made. There were a total of 4 lifeboats able to contain up to 75 passengers. At this time, the remaining crew used the blind ram shear blades to sever the drill pipeline, but the attempts was unsuccessful. This was due to 2 reasons. When a pipe is slightly bent, it has slightly more surface area on one side, but when a lot of pressurized water goes through the pipe, the water will warp with a bending force, causing the pipe to be stretched out. In this case, when the shear rams were used to sever the pipeline, it was unable to fully cut the pipe due to the bend reaching outside of the vicinity to cut the pipe. At this point, because nothing was able to seal the pipeline, on April 22nd, 2 days after the blowout, the rig is completely engulfed in flames from the explosions, eventually sinking the large structure into the ocean, 1 mile down in the ocean. It took BP 85 days to stop the influx of crude oil into the Gulf of Mexico. Many animals such as birds, fish, and invertebrates die, usually 2 weeks after an oil spill. In the case of this one, it went on for 3 months. The United States Department of Justice had given 48 felony plus 2 misdemeanor charges against 4 BP VIPs. 2 of these men were given manslaughter charges, and BP was fined $4 billion US, but even after the acknowledgement of negligence, no personnel actually served any true jail time. To this day, oil rigging is still one of the largest industries dependent upon the world. But catastrophes, deaths, freak accidents are still prominent, especially in offshore drilling where you cannot run away. Its unpredictable nature makes it a hazard for anyone working at these jobs, and while the pay is well, you seriously cannot underestimate when work goes down the wrong way. I hope you enjoyed this video. What are your thoughts on this? And if you have any experience on this industry, I would like to hear your comment about it down below. Did I miss anything? Is there anything else that I could bring to the table that I didn't? One thing for sure, though, is remembering the lives of the 11 people that passed away. This was an event that caused so much widespread controversy over oil to begin with. That is all I have to say. Have a good rest of your day.